Hello, guys, and hello out there, and hi, Dad. I'm going to tell you all about the U.S. presidents. So let's start off from all the way back to 1788. George Washington was our first president. He went from 1788 to 1796. He was our first president and led the colonial army in their revolt against Britain. At the time, we were not a free country and we were ruled under King George. He was a terrible person. Number two, after that came his vice president, John Adams, who became the first vice president to become the actual president. He served in 1796 to 1800.
So you said he was from Massachusetts.
And he was the first president from Massachusetts.
Okay.
Thomas Jefferson. He was the president who purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. He served from 1800. He served from the 1800s to 1808. Then came James Madison. He was called the father of Constitution. He went from 1808 to 1816. Then there came James Monroe. 1816 to 1824. Presidency was called the era of good feeling because he did so much for our country. Then came John Quincy Adams, 1824 to 1828. He only went for a term. He was the son of John Adams. He was also the first president to have a former president who was his father.
Oh.
Right? Because as we all know, that happens many times. Then there came Andrew Jackson, one of the most stubborn presidents in history. He went from 1828 to 1836. Then we have Martin Van Buren. He was number 8. He was the first president born in the United States. He went from 1836 to 1840. Then we had William Harrison. He had the shortest presidency in history. He ran in 1840 and wanted to show he was super tough. They wanted to show he was really tough. So he had a long inauguration speech and did it on the coldest day of the year without a coat. And he died a month later of pneumonia.
Wow.
James K. Polk. He went from 1844 to 1848. His campaign slogan was 5440 or fight. The manifest destiny happened during this time. Zachary Taylor was our president in 1848 to 1850. He was a war hero, and many presidents were war heroes. Then there was Millard Fillmore, 1850 to 1852. He was most remembered for the Great Compromise in 1850. Now this is going to make you mad. He would have been the one to stop slavery. He wanted to be the one to stop slavery. But he wanted to be the one to stop slavery in all the 13 all across America. But they wouldn't give up. So he decided to let the South be the racists and the North be the good guys. Then there came Franklin Pierce. He went from 1852 to 1856. He was originally from Nebraska. Then came James Buchanan. He went from 1856 to 1860. He was the first president in history to be a bachelor. See, that had never been heard of before. Most presidents usually have like a wife, right? And then came our 16th president, and you know him as the man with the tall hat and the beard. That's right. I'm talking about Abraham Lincoln. He fought for civil rights in the Civil War. Common misconception. Nobody knows this, but he was a Republican, but he was still a good man, right? And he ran for from 1860 to 1865. He would have had 2 terms to his name, but the only problem was in 1865 he was assassinated. And he never got to see the end of the World War. Then came Andrew Johnson. See, the World War wasn't officially ended when Abraham Lincoln died. So Andrew Johnson had to take over. He took over from 1865 to 1868. See, a lot of presidents died or got assassinated in office, so they had to serve for the rest of the former president's presidency. All you need to know about him, he was the only Southerner who stayed with the North, and he was also known as a traitor. So he was from down south, but he sided with the North in the Civil War. Ulysses S. Grant went from 1868 to 1876. He was the hero of the Civil War, but a heavy drinker. He was a heavy drinker, like it was a problem. And then there came Rutherford B. Hayes, 1876 to 1880. He made the Reconstruction end down south, basically. And that's when sharecropping started. Sharecropping was when you could rent land at a high price by someone else. And sharecropping is not that fair because you're sharing the land with someone and they're making it very expensive. So how can you pay the rent? That's why a lot of black people were poor, because they put all their hard-earned money into a crop, into a field that they couldn't even afford, but they had no choice to buy because they had to support their families somehow. And when they finally paid off the money, they barely had enough for themselves. James Garfield, he went from 1880 to 1881, short presidency. He was ambidextrous, and he was bilingual. So he could use both hands to write, and one hand could write in English, and the other hand could write in Spanish or French. He's the only president who could do that. Nobody's really found anyone else who could do that. And probably not in this country, especially. And then there came Chester A. Arthur. He ran from 1881 to 1884, and I'm pretty sure he died of a kidney infection. Then up next came Grover Cleveland. He was our 22nd and 24th president. He was the first president to run to have a presidency that was separate. So he ran once, got inaugurated, he got elected. Then another president came, and then he became president again after that other president, right? So he became president 2 times, but in separate time frames, right? Then came Benjamin Harrison. He was the grandson of William Harrison. He ran from 1888 to 1896. Then there came William McKinley, 1897 to 1901. This is when the 1900s started to come along, right? It was a new century, right? McKinley always wore a red carnation in his lapel for good luck, right? Then came Teddy Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909. He was the first president to fly in an airplane. See, that had never been really done before. Then came Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 1921. he created the League of Nations, which today would be called the United Nations. See, they didn't like the idea. Everyone was okay with the idea except the Americans. And that's when we created the United Nations. Then came Warren G. Harding, 1921 to 1923. He was the first president to speak over the radio. And the Teapot Dome scandal. The Teapot Dome scandal happened around this time. President Harding was giving info on inside trading, which was illegal. And that's why he got taken out of office. He got taken out of office, but they did not arrest him for it. They didn't want to see another president behind bars. Then came Calvin Coolidge, 1923 to 1929. Had an electric horse installed in his White House bedroom. Then came Herbert Hoover. Oh, nobody liked this president. Around this time, did the thing just shut off? Is it still playing? Oh, I'm sorry, folks, on the camera. Sorry. Herbert Hoover. Nobody liked this president. He was a terrible president. He didn't do much for the country.
Just telling me that my battery's gonna low though.
Yeah, he didn't do much for the country. Went from 1929 to 1933. The first president to have an asteroid named after him, even though nobody liked him. He was also had a dam named after him, Hoover Dam. Then came a great president, like one of the greatest presidents, and actually my personal favorite president, Franklin D. Roosevelt. The first president to appear on television. Went from 1933 to 1945.
Why do you like him so much?
Well, he was the main reason. He wanted equal rights for everyone. He was good to everyone. He loved all. He helped us. He helped so much in the World War, even though he didn't get to see it end officially. He technically kind of did get to see it end, because the war ended in 1945, but it didn't end until later on in the year.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't officially get to see it end. Then came Harry S. Truman, 1945 to 1953. He was the first president to travel underwater by modern submarine. Now, he was the one who got to see World War II end.
Mm-hmm. Then
came Dwight Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961. Had a putting green installed on the White House lawn. Then came the 35th President, John F. Kennedy. He went from 1961 to 1963. Sadly, he was assassinated. He was from Massachusetts, and he was the first Boy Scout president. Then after him came Lyndon B. Johnson. He ran from 1963 to 1969. The first president sworn in by a woman, which was big at the time. A few more folks. Then after him came Richard Nixon. Nobody really liked Nixon all that much. Richard Nixon went from 1969 to 1974. The first president to resign his office, right? First president to do that. First president to actually resign. See, presidents had been impeached and killed in office, but no president had resigned officially, because it was tough back then without the legal papers. Then came Gerald R. Ford. His daughter, Susan, held their senior prom in the White House, right? He ran from 1974 to 1977. He got the short presidency because Nixon didn't get to finish his presidency. Then came Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981. New decade in the 1900s. The first president born in a hospital. Then came, actually, not a lot of people know this. People may think that's a bad thing, but a lot of people back then were either born in a home or either born in their homes, and all presidents back then were born in their homes. He was the first president. It wasn't uncommon. A lot of people preferred to do that in there because they could do it themselves, and they guaranteed that it'd be cleaner. Then came Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989, the first president to have been divorced. Then came George Bush, the first president to refuse publicity to eat broccoli. Now, see, I like that president.
Yeah, no.
Now, I don't like him for what he did, but I like him for standing up against broccoli. I mean, broccoli is the most nasty thing I've ever had. But see, no president has ever refused to actually eat something in public. Like, it's a common courtesy for a president to eat what you're getting served when you're in public, right? But he publicly refused to say no. That's why it was such a big, thing. People made such a big stink about it because no president's ever refused to eat something they were offered. Then came Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, the first president to have been a Rhodes Scholar. Then came George W. Bush. He was his father was George Bush. He went from 2001 to 2009. Didn't do much for our country. Nobody really liked him. And then I'm going to talk to you about my personal favorite president. Barack Obama, the first black president under the Constitution. Under our Constitution. And then, the newest, most terrible president of all.
45. That's it. Don't even say his name.
45.
Okay.
Donald J.
Don't.
Trump. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Orange Manic is going to get his feelings hurt.
I'm just going to end this one here.
Huh?
I'm just going to end that here.